Hi, hello, and welcome, everyone. My name's Beau Estes, and you're watching the Sports Business Classroom web show, where each Thursday we get together with a group of industry experts to discuss the issues that are affecting both sports and the NBA. And this week we have three gentlemen closely associated with our program. In fact, nobody more closely associated with it than Larry Coon. He's the man that runs the Sports Business Classroom program. He's the GM. Larry, how you doing, bud?
I'm doing great. We got the gang together for this show. I love it. Hey, but I got to tell you one thing. At least once during this broadcast, we have to prank call Dave Dufour.
I think it's a rule. Maybe it becomes a tradition starting this week. I like it, Larry. And since you're the GM, you can make those sort of rules.
Okay, consider it a rule. Consider it.
Moving on now, Eric Pincus is a salary cap expert. Before Larry gets out of hand, he contributes to Bleacher Report, Basketball Insiders, and the Hollywood Hoops podcast. I've seen him around NBA TV as well. He's an instructor with SBC. How you doing, Eric?
He's waiting for me to talk.
So it looks like we're having a little difficulty with Eric, who's sort of bouncing in and out there. Let's move on to Seth real quick, and we'll get straight with Eric. And just there you are, Seth, looking good. The former director of basketball research for the Milwaukee Bucks, a current contributor to The Athletic, now also working with SBC.
Hey, doing great. Thanks for having me on, gentlemen.
On top of that, he deals with Dave Dufour all the time. How you doing, Seth?
I'm doing well. I support prank calling Dave whenever possible.
Of course you do. Let's move on real quick. Just a little more on SBC. The Sports Business Classroom, obviously, it's an immersive training program, an educational experience that pairs with a summer league. Go to sportsbusinessclassroom.com to apply today. You can also catch archived episodes of this show and our audio experience hosted by Sergio Milas. So you're going to want to go over to sportsbusinessclassroom.com. And guys, before we get going, I want to thank the first responders who are trying their best to keep us all safe. They're really risking themselves. So we appreciate what they are doing. And also those youth sports programs, all those coaches, those kids, all those people that run that system, those youth sports operators, we're thinking about you. We miss you, and we know that we'll be getting back to normal when we see all of you guys out there doing your thing as well. So let's hop in right now. NBA teams are planning to come back. Larry, let's start with you. What are you hearing about these teams as they start to come back?
I'm hearing the same things everybody else is hearing. This is unique. This has never happened before. We're in uncharted territory here. So people are cautious. I mean, the NBA itself is risk averse. And I think that's especially going to be true in this situation because we have to weigh the cost benefit of this, right? The benefit is we get society back. We get basketball back. We get our activities back. The cost is the virus does not care. And everything is a trade-off. So if we come back too soon, we come back in the wrong way, this thing can come roaring back. So every day can be measured in terms of a body count practically. So where is the league going to say this is an acceptable risk where we think that we have looked at all the ways of all the risk, all the ways of mitigating those risks, and we think it's safe, not only for the players, but everybody it takes to put on a game of basketball, put it on, broadcast it, host it, everything around that. That's going to be tough. Nobody knows the answer. There's no perfect answer here. It's where are the trade-offs and where's the point where you say, okay, and then what are the triggers where we're going to say, it's just not working out, we have to back off.
Seth, Larry talks about walking that fine line about when to come back, the risks versus the benefits and everything like that. From a team standpoint, what do you think teams are thinking about in terms of those risks and those benefits, and how long will they need to get back up and running and ready to play in your mind?
That's a good question. In terms of back ready to play, just from a quality of play and athlete safety, like aside from the broader world, I can't see them being able to get back like into actual game action in under 3 weeks, and I think that's probably pretty aggressive. Again, the conditioning level needed to play actual NBA games is pretty high, and that's in these circumstances, I don't think that it's reasonable to expect every or even most players to have been able to maintain that sharpness. In terms of what I'm hearing, I think that the folks I talk to are more on the kind of the operational level, the analytics space, and I think everyone is desirous of getting back to play. I think there's a broad split of opinion in terms of when and how that's going to happen, whether it's going to be complete a regular season, whether it's going to be the 2020 playoffs, whether it's going to be some version of just starting 2020, 2021. There's a certainly at that the day-to-day operations level, I think that there's for you have the number of opinions as people I've talked to, and no real rhyme or reason between the pessimists and the optimists. You'd think that the people who are most optimistic would be for the work for the better teams, but it hasn't really broken out that way. There's been people who work for lotto teams who think we're coming back, and teams that work for contenders that think that this season is not going to get finished and we'll start fresh next year.
Quick follow-up on that, Seth. What are the smart people that work in analytics doing now to use their time to try to get out ahead of the curve, so when we do come back, maybe they've gained an advantage?
No, that's I'm glad you asked that. One of the biggest things is, I think they mostly just want some kind of certainty as to what they should be working on. I mean, are you doing playoff prep, or are you getting ready for the draft? I mean, it's so those are sort of the pathways we can kind of go down here, and it's a little bit of limbo. Like, do I start my off-season stuff now? Do I am I starting to create the dossiers on who we might play in the first round, or am I turning the page and draft modeling and looking at free agency, and the normal kind of seasonal rhythm of the calendar has obviously been completely upended by this.
All right. So what this all means, I guess, at the end of the day is that there's going to be a decline in basketball revenue for the NBA. So, Larry, how does that impact the cap, and what does that all mean for free agency as we go forward?
Sure. Well, let's talk about it in terms of this season first, right? Because the players in the union, the league and the union have an agreement, the CBA, that says how they divide up the revenues. And the players basically get half the revenues coming in. It's anywhere from 49 to 51. And that determines how much they collectively get to the dime. So when revenues go down, the players' share of the pie goes down, which is why they came up with an agreement with the union this year to start withholding a bigger share of the money in escrow, because escrow is there for fine tuning. It's just like taxes. We're going to withhold an amount, and then when you do your taxes, we figure out exactly how much you keep and how much the government keeps. Same thing with escrow. We're going to withhold an amount, keep it in a pot, and then at the end of the year, when we know what revenues are, and therefore what you all get collectively, we'll figure out who gets what. They had to make a bigger pot this year because of that, because they expect revenues to be down. I don't know the amount, but I would imagine, and it also depends on whether we actually lose games to television, it could be north of $1 billion, maybe even more. So that's what happens this year. Now, next year, by default, they base what they think will happen next year on what did happen this year. So they take the revenues, they figure out what the TV revenue is next year. They add a normal bump to that, and then that's called their projected BRI, and then they set the salary cap based on that. That's out the window next year, obviously. But that's the easiest thing for the league and the union to do, is to say, all right, we're going to use this hard number for projected revenues because it's a unique situation. We can't base it off of last year. So presuming, number one, that we start a season and have a full season and have it on time next year. And number two, there's no huge dip because we are not feeling the after effects of the pandemic, and we think that revenues are just kind of go back to normal or close to it. The salary cap may not be affected a lot next year. This could be an isolated thing that's just affecting this year.
So, Seth, I asked you about how teams are viewing this and how it works inside of teams. As you look at free agency, given what Larry just said, how are they forecasting ahead, and how are they viewing the free agency that comes in 2020 and 2021?
My guess is that teams are going to be very cautious. I don't think there's going to be a ton of free agency money out there this year anyway. And I think that let me back up and say that, within teams, they have people who are, kind of looking at many different scenarios for where the cap will end up. And, they come up with kind of a range. And for ease of decisions, probably, a Papa Bear, Mama Bear, Baby Bear kind of scenario where these, where's it going to be? And let's kind of, okay,
And
we think it's going to be the middle
throughout the year, right? That's an ongoing revised process. Sure.
No, I mean, that's something that started, obviously that's something that's been ongoing this year. I mean, starting with the sort of the impacts and fallout from, Daryl Morey's comments about China and the reaction to that. And then I don't know the details. Maybe you do a little better, Larry, but the Microsoft deal that was just announced, that probably has some impact on revenue at some point. But I think even working with the assumptions that Larry just laid out for what they could peg the cap at for next year, I think that there's some, looking, broader than just basketball. There's obviously some downside risk to, what does the broader economy look like and how does that affect revenue? So even if you kind of make some conservative assumptions, it could still miss low. And then you sign what looks like for example, if you sign a mid-level contract, which is tied to the amount of the cap, all of a sudden, if the cap drops next year, and by next year, I mean like the 21 off season, then all of a sudden this mid-level contract is now, a decent amount higher as relative to the salary cap, where it's intended to be sort of flat and maybe even declining in a situation of increasing revenues.
So Larry and Seth, either of you on this one, but Seth mentioned something interesting, the broader economic picture here. How often are teams really looking at that and how that impacts things? Or is that a unique situation now that we're looking at?
No, it happens all the time. So the league year in advance will start notifying teams, this is what we're projecting the revenue to come in at and what we expect the cap level and tax level to be for next year. And the league periodically gives updates to those numbers until they get to the final number on June 30th. So the teams have been kept apprised of that, and then they run like Seth said, they know a high and low. Okay, our confidence interval is that it's going to come anywhere in this range, so we're going to say it could come out with this or this, and that's what it's going to mean for us. But as Seth said, we don't even know the range, or the error bars in that range are so huge. It's better to think of it in terms of here's three things that can happen with the economy in general. An optimistic scenario, a pessimistic scenario, and then something in the middle, and then have independent ranges for all three of those. So you're really running those numbers in parallel 3 times rather than just once in a normal situation.
And so, Seth, this is somewhat unique in that the broader economic picture around the globe impacts these more than you would normally think. That's fair, right?
Yeah, I think so. I do not think that NBA teams, as a rule, employ macroeconomists. So this is kind of outside the scope of what really, I would say, most people dealing with this have ever really. I mean, as it is for all of us.
So you may be able to see if you're watching at home, Eric Pincus is not with us right now. I can tell we're working in the background to try to get him back. But we'll move on now, moving ahead to the revenue gap. Obviously, it's going to hit us all. But what are your insights as to how the NBA could generate additional revenue? Seth, we'll start with you. Any way, any mechanism, any creative ideas to generate more revenue to help make up some of that lost money?
I think I mentioned it earlier, the new partnership with Microsoft. I think I know Adam Silver went on Ben Thompson's, who's a well-known kind of tech business writer, his podcast, I want to say about 3 weeks ago, and he outlined kind of trying to figure out ways to move from a one-to-many model of producing content for fans to a more one-to-one model, which is I don't know if that looks like microtransactions, like with like an app-based game, or some kind of a la carte way to allow to monetize fans, kind of customizing their engagement in other ways. I think that's I don't think we know what that looks like yet, but I think that's sort of one of the newer frontiers.
Larry, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so Seth brought up a great point, which is that from a micro scale, you can do a lot to monetize small transactions, and those all add up, of course. But I was also going to mention that on the larger scale, like the Microsoft deal, the league makes deals, large deals with different organizations all the time. And there's a structure for the money coming in. So any deals coming in this year, I could see them possibly opting to front load that money. It's like, hey, we're going to have a big dip. Let's try and fill in that dip a little bit in order to make this year look as normal as possible, even though we're going to make a little bit less down the road because the money was front loaded. Now, since Eric is not on the call, he always freezes up at the wrong moment.
He's listening, Larry. I know he's listening.
Okay, Eric, you froze. So this is Eric's idea because he talked to me about it a couple of days ago, and we kind of talked through this. So credit goes to him on this. And this is kind of a radical idea, and probably nothing. If he's back,
I'm here.
Say it.
Eric, I know you're listening to Larry. He's about to jump on your idea.
I teed it up for you, Eric.
Very nice, Larry. Your thoughts on an additional way to make some money, perhaps, for the league creatively?
Well, first of all, thank you, gentlemen, for being so patient. Like we did a run, everything was perfect, and then like literally, Beau, you come in and do your intro, and I'm like, Beau doesn't sound that great, and I know Beau's the best, right? So it can't be Beau. Next thing I know, I'm kicked off. So here we are. It's technology. This is the world we live in. But I'm glad I got back when I got back. Larry was about to steal my thunder. You know what I'm talking about. So look, I don't know if this is the answer, and I reached out to a number of people. One of them was Mark Cuban, and he said right now, like, expansion isn't on the front burner. There's a lot more that they have to worry about right now, and that's true. There's a lot to figure out. The last thing they're going to do right now is talk about expansion. But as we get back to games and as things start to progress, and they look and they see, wow, we're in a big hole financially for a long period of time. This is going to impact us maybe even into next year. If there are no fans in attendance to start the year, they may push it back to December, all these things. And I don't know what was discussed, but the idea would be if you expanded, you would bring in a significant amount of money. In theory, you would bring in the amount of a franchise. What an average franchise, according to Forbes, is about $2.1 billion. If you brought in two franchises, you could potentially bring in $4 billion into the revenue. Now, it's not basketball revenue, so it doesn't go to the players, but it helps the teams who might be going into debt to try to get through this difficult time. So it's an idea. It dilutes their piece of the pie, and it's not necessarily – and Larry, I quote Larry in a story that's coming out on Bleacher Report on this, that it is a permanent solution to a temporary problem, and it's very true. But I'll say that Adam Silver said multiple times that expansion is inevitable. It's going to happen. It's not happening yet, and it's not on the front burner. So if it's going to happen in 3 years, 4 years, whatever, maybe it's time to think about doing it in 1 year so that you can make up that income. It doesn't solve everything for the players, but it helps provide a cash influx. So teams aren't going into debt. They've got money that can get them through this time.
Larry, you wanted to respond to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one quick thing to that, because when you collect these franchise fees from applicants is completely different from when that team is starting to play. So they can even have the best of all worlds. If they say, oh, we were planning on expanding in 2025 or 2026, they could say, all right, we're opening the doors now. Here's the franchise fee. We're going to get the money in now. Collect that money. It goes into this year's books. It fills in that gap. The great thing about that money, like Eric said, is that it's money that doesn't go to the players. Well, so, great for the league, not so much for the players.
Real quick, I want to touch on this. It's an idea now. We discussed it as an idea. How quickly, realistically, could it go from idea to we like it to let's start the wheels moving on this and get something done? How much time realistically does that take?
Yeah, realistic. I mean, how realistically, what does it take normally?
Sure.
Versus realistically, because years of planning, right? But realistically, in a situation like this, could they say part of it's just putting together the people with the money to be able to do this? I mean, they could execute something quickly. I think the hard part would be to find the people who are ready to say, okay, I'm in. here's 200, here's $2 billion. Let's do this. That's going to be the hard part. And I think they want to encumber that money before June 30th in order to have it count on this year's books. On the other hand, if it happens later in the year, but it's coming in 2020, I don't think that's that bad for them either.
Seth, it's obviously takes us down a bit of a different course. Any reaction to the idea?
No, I think a couple of weeks ago on the Athletic, John Hollinger and I did kind of a back and forth, and we talked about expansion as kind of a solution to some other issues too. I think that expansion is an interesting way of possibly dealing with some of the scheduling issues. I think you can make up some revenue by just having a couple more teams that you can, by reducing the number of games per team, but still having kind of a similar amount of TV inventory. Now it has to be split a little bit differently, but that's still a possible option. And I think from my standpoint, I think the player pool is certainly robust enough that there are enough players that you would not be just scraping the bottom of the barrel to add 30 more guys to the league in a given season.
It's cheaper than ever now, right?
Yeah, definitely. And especially depending on how this is, we're going further and further afield, but as kind of the age discussion and the minor league discussion kind of progresses as well, I think those factor in to a degree.
Larry, you wanted to respond to something Seth said?
Just one quick point. Forget the Sonics. We have to add a team to Seattle and call them the Murder Hornets.
Well, merchandising, I think, could do something.
Yeah. Well, NHL Seattle might beat you to that nickname though, because they're still waiting to come up with their the rumors abound that it's going to be the Seattle Kraken in the NHL, which I'm all. But they might pivot to Murder Hornets.
Okay, but before I jump on to the next thing, best team nickname I've ever heard. There's a small town south of Atlanta called Macon that used to have a hockey team. They were called the Macon Whoopie. Fantastic. And they sold so much here. Macon Whoopie did a ton of business down there in Macon, Georgia.
Okay.
All right, guys. Okay, so we've talked about the free agency and what we expect to happen with the cap, or what could happen with the cap. The season's in limbo. I mean, I think we can all accept that now. Which teams have the most to gain and which teams have the most to lose if we decide to extend or eliminate the season? Seth, I know you've got somebody in mind here.
Well, I think there's the kind of the obvious teams at the top of both conferences would be the LA teams and my old team, the Bucks. But I want to the team that I think is more interesting is the Rockets. I think Larry can probably get into the sort of the finances of it, but I think that it's sort of a last dance kind of feel to their season. Mike D'Antoni his contract ends this year. And beyond that, I think that their path to the title was that they're kind of unprecedented, going all in on extreme small ball. And if they're still kind of in that honeymoon phase where they're catching teams by surprise, and if this season kind of rolled over into next year and teams got a full season to look at it and prepare, and maybe even adjust their rosters, I don't think that kind of that sort of let's get weird card has as much kind of surprise factor as it might if the playoffs were going now, because nobody had very few teams had even seen that. So they're a team that I think they did some very creative moves to open a window that didn't look like it was there, but I think it was just a window for more than likely just for this year. And if it doesn't happen, then I don't think it will happen.
Larry, teams you could see benefiting from the season being extended, and teams that you see benefiting from the season being canceled altogether. So go through that.
Yeah, so I agree with Seth on that. I mean, in addition to Mike D'Antoni, this possibly being the end of the line for him with Houston, that's a very expensive team. And their owner is not exactly in the perfect financial situation. He's being hit hard by this. So I could see things happening there just from a financial standpoint. From a basketball standpoint, and I know Eric was going to talk about this, but the murder hornet scared him away. The Lakers, obviously, because they have Anthony Davis with a player option this year. They could conceivably lose him. We have LeBron getting older. They have a lot to prove here. They were riding high up to the point where the season was canceled. So this could be devastating for them. They finally come back all the way, and then this happens. When you look at what could happen. Why would I want to answer this question one way or another? Either the players could be either aging out or leaving. You could have the coaches, and Seth already covered Mike D'Antoni. Front office, maybe Toronto, who's doing fine, but Fred VanVleet is a potential free agent. And then who knows what's going to happen with Masai Ujiri in the future. You could have the whole thing with the end of the playoffs in the East, the 6, 7, 8 teams, with Orlando and all them. Who's going to be in, who's going to be out? Washington. That could be a thing that one of those teams could say, yeah, I want it to end, or another one could say, no, we wanted this season to continue. But then on the other side of it, so who might benefit from this? I mean, from a strictly basketball standpoint, Golden State, I think, can't wait for 2020 to be over. From a financial standpoint, yeah, this is their first year in the new arena, and they wanted that money coming in. But from a basketball standpoint, my God. And then Brooklyn, maybe, okay, we're going to start up again, and we have Kevin Durant back. What could be better than that?
That's an interesting point. Imagine a scenario if the league comes back this year and the Brooklyn Nets are able to put together Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving healthy. Seth, what could an outlook be for a healthy team with Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and the rest of the crew suddenly, all of a sudden, galloping through the end of a regular season and into the playoffs?
Man, that's
that even fair, really?
I think that's given the nature of, I think the Achilles tear is kind of demonstrably the worst, relatively common injury a basketball player can suffer. And there is just no real track record of even all-star players. Dominique Wilkins was an all-star once after he tore his, and no one else has kind of gotten back. Now, Durant has some
his physical size, right?
Yeah. And also his shooting ability, like, gives him that to get back to that. But for them to have like a legitimate chance, he has to be a top 5 player. Is that realistic this year? I think, like, best rosiest scenario, he's a top 15 player, and that's the rest of their roster has some decent players, but I don't think that's enough.
So you feel the same way, basically, Larry. Kevin Durant comes back, and it's still very difficult to imagine them marching through an Eastern Conference.
Yeah, I mean, does he come back like Dominique came back, or Kobe's was offset by that bone break? But those are success stories. Does he come back like Chauncey Billups came back? Well, he's not going to help him that much.
One thing I'm curious about, Seth and Larry, is if we think of the season stopped in early March, and maybe the earliest we could get back is sometime in June. That's almost like an off season, and teams come back differently from season to season. Do you expect, let's start with you, Seth, do you expect some teams to be almost a different identity when they come back after what serves honestly as an off season?
I mean, it's impossible not to think that. I mean, the sort of the continuity of the comfort that people have, not just playing, but just like the day-to-day routine of being around each other. That's, that is not something that you can manufacture. And obviously bringing that cohesion back under these circumstances, some teams will do it better than others, but I think expecting every team to just snap right back in and it's routine and we're back to work. I think that's, I don't think that's realistic to expect. And I don't think that we have any real way to predict from the outset which teams will handle that relatively better or worse than others. Because there's just any number of factors that could, play into that. And whether it's obviously there's been some very sad stories of relatives of players
Sure.
being affected, and on the extreme of that end, and or if time has kind of healed some wounds, if there was some over the course of a season, there'll be little, you'll have little bickering sessions about something, but that probably seems pretty trivial now. So maybe those things get just smoothed out naturally. So I don't think that we, especially from the outside, have any real way of making sense of which teams are likely to weather that recombobulation better.
I think Seth makes a good point, Larry. There's going to be new storylines when this whole thing comes back eventually, right?
Yeah, this is a multifactorial problem, right? Because on one hand, you just have the straight conditioning, and people have been sheltering in place at home. And yeah, these guys are professional athletes. They're going to keep themselves in shape, but it's still going to be a bell curve to a certain extent. There are some guys who are just going to come back, be better than they were before, maybe, because all they did was spend 8 hours a day in their home gym. On the other hand, there might be some players who really treated it like an off season, and I don't get to vacation somewhere else, so I'm just going to sit around my pool and drink Mai Tais all day. You're going to see both. Some are going to come back close to being okay, some are not. But these guys have not played with others during this entire time. So even if they're in great game shape, they're not in the real kind of basketball shape that comes from banging against other bodies the whole time. And of course, getting all the coordination and getting used to each other again, it's going to be just like coming back into training camp. It's going to take some time for coaches to adapt to what they have. And figure out how to be working and playing everybody. So I expect it to be similar to a preseason for whatever preseason, I hope they have some kind of abbreviated preseason, but then even the rest of whatever the regular season would be, I think that it would just be getting used to playing again. And then maybe hopefully by the time they start a playoffs, it would be something that resembles a little bit better what we come to expect from NBA basketball.
Larry, one question that's it's interesting to me, at least, if this season goes on beyond July 1st, how does the league handle extending those contracts, and how does that all work?
I think the league and the Players Association, well, there is a clause in the CBA. There's the force majeure that we all know about. That says if there's a sudden drop in revenues and if games are canceled, they get to take it out of the players' paychecks. They're kind of beyond that. They're in a different clause, which is the act of God clause, right? If there is a sudden loss in revenue that's really substantial, it just says that the league and the union are going to negotiate together in good faith to figure out what to do about it, how to modify the rules of the CBA to accommodate this. So what's going to happen is that they're just going to come up with an agreement that's going to say, and this is the union collectively on behalf of the players doing this bargaining, just agreeing, okay, this season is going to last through whatever, August 15th, all contracts are extended through that. That's fine for the players. And I think that that's all doable. But we go back to Seth's comment about Mike D'Antoni. Coaches are not unionized, and Mike D'Antoni's contract ends June 30th. So what do you do about coaches in that situation? There could be some messiness here.
Seth, one thing I like to end this show with every week is, look, I'm a young student or a young person trying to get into the business of basketball, and my whole world's been turned upside down. What do I do now to put myself in the best position going forward and to take advantage of this time so that I'll be ready when everything gets back to normal?
I mean, the silver lining from that standpoint is you have time to do in-depth projects. This question comes up a lot, certainly in the analytics space. It comes up all the time. Like, this is what I want to do. How do I get into it? And the answer is always the way you demonstrate that you are worthy and should get one of these jobs is to act as if you already have one. I'm sure students approach Larry all the time with their kind of cap analysis. From my standpoint, it's answer a basketball question from a statistical analysis point of view. It doesn't have to be NBA. It can be college. It can be lower level college. It can be European. It could be WNBA. It could be any level of basketball where you find that there's a knowledge gap, that you can sort of demonstrate both your technical skills, your presentational skills, and then your ability to analyze in terms of a basketball game, not just numbers on a spreadsheet or on a page. This is time to get working on that, and it's never been easier to self-publish that kind of stuff and get it out there, get feedback on it, and first of all, that'll put yourself out there, and second of all, it'll give you a better sense of if you're any good at it or not. There's a lot of things. I think we've all experienced a lot of things. I think I could be good at that, and then you start doing it. It's like, actually, no. There's some things I'd need to know to be good at that. I don't have those yet, and then you have to decide whether those skills are whether you can acquire those skills or not. So that's I think that's the general advice I would give at any time, and I think a time where presumably a lot of people are kind of stuck in situations where there's less social engagement and stuff like that. You've got some time and space to think big about those kind of projects.
All right, Larry, you're swing at that. What would you recommend students be doing right now?
You just have to go through me. It's impossible. No. In terms of what Seth said, yes, I agree completely. And there's no shortage of opportunities for people who are able to tie everything together and communicate, right? People who can not only do the analytics, but have the ability to communicate it to front offices, communicate it to coaches, communicate it to players, help work out, okay, how do we change this from data, from information I have on a screen, on paper, in diagrams, to something actionable on the court? I think that is going to be the next huge step for people who could really do that, to be able to do that. Now, in terms of kind of doing what I do, part of it is I always like to say that it's much easier to be the best when you're in a field of one. There really wasn't any kind of job for people who do what I do. I kind of created that. And the thing of a capologist, because before GMs did it, or they hired outside attorneys who did it. And again, it was people, if they hired an outside attorney who did it, then it was people who understood the law part of it, but not necessarily how that related to what was happening on the roster, on the court, within the team. And having the capologist who's going to be able to tie all that information together is huge. And there are more and more opportunities for people to be able to do that. Now, many teams, if not most, have their own capologists, people who can come in there and not just be the guys who say, okay, run out and tell me everybody whose salary is within this band and put together all the potential trades for this and bring me a stack of those. But people who could really contribute to the narrative for the team. Here's how to help drive what we're doing, and this is my contribution to that. And making sure also, one of the things that I try to do with what I do with Sports Business Classroom, with the executive session, with working with teams directly, is to sort of elevate that level of conversation, so that it's just like you have to have a certain level of basketball knowledge to be able to sit at that table and talk basketball with the coaches and the front office people. I want to get it so that everybody is at the same baseline level of understanding of the CBA and the salary cap implications, so that when and this goes to coaches, this goes to scouts, this goes to everybody, so that when they're sitting around the table and talking about this stuff, they're communicating the same language and they understand it. They understand each other, and now the CBA implications is right there with the basketball implications and the scouting implications and the coaching implications. The teams that can best integrate all that are the teams that are going to be successful going into the future, and I think that's where a lot of great opportunities are going to lie.
Well, if you're watching at home right now, you can see across the top of your screen, SBC registration is still open. So go to sportsbusinessclassroom.com for that. Larry, just give us the latest. What's the lay of the land? What's going on with Sports Business Classroom?
Yeah, so like the entire world, we're still in wait and see mode, right? Registration for Sports Business Classroom is still open, but we are part and parcel of the NBA Summer League. And if the NBA decides, okay, we're just going to extend the season throughout the summer and we're not going to have a summer league this year, then that affects us greatly. greatly, of course. If there's going to be a summer league and it happens later, we have to adapt to that. If there's not going to be something, or it's going to be so late that it overlaps the academic calendar and we're just going to lose a bunch of our target demographic, then we have to pivot and do something else. So we are exploring alternatives. We're looking at distance learning alternatives. We're looking at video course alternatives. We're about to come out with one for the CBA. We are going to provide something for you. It's going to be something good. We're going to make lemonade out of lemons to the extent that we possibly can, even if it is not going to be the as scheduled week-long immersive sports business classroom held at Summer League in July.
All right. Thank you so much, Larry, as always. And Seth, thank you for jumping in as well. I know you're becoming part of the SBC thing. And yeah, Eric, sort of like the letter Y for us. It's a sometimes vowel, sometimes not. But thank you for being here, Eric. And thanks all of you for watching. It's the Sports Business Classroom Web Show. Check us out on sportsbusinessclassroom.com. And once again, thanks for watching.